Okay, hello. This is the first guided project in this series of guided projects. Um, Not exactly what I should call them. I'm deciding to call them reverse engineering of the projects. That may not be the correct term, but the idea is that we're going to go through a series of games and um, we're going to kind of analyze how they work or how we think they must work, and then build that based on sort of the analysis of how they work in general. We're not actually going to base it off of exactly how the real programs work. Our copies will be ones that we come up with our own way of doing it, but it should mimic the behavior of the things that we're sort of copying. So I'm calling it that for that reason. The first project, the idea is that these projects will build on each other so that you'll learn a little bit about some basic features, and then each project will, honestly, most of the projects will be very similar, based on very similar things. But every time we do a new project, it should be a bit different, so that you kind of learn new things every project, while seeing how all the projects are kind of similar and related. The idea is that you'll have a lot of example code that you can copy and paste from later when you do your own projects. And hopefully you get a sense for how all programs are in some ways similar, and how some variations in the basic design of any program can make it, one type of game or a different type of game, depending on what you want. Okay, so the first project that we have here is an alignment quiz. So maybe you've taken things like this online. Alignment is for a game like role-playing games like Dungeons and Dragons. And so it kind of tells you how your character behaves, and I'll explain what we mean by alignment. The idea here is that we're going to ask the user of the program a series of questions, and based on their responses to those questions, we're going to determine what one of 9 different player types they are. And you can see the options listed on the screen. There's lawful. There's this is a 2-dimensional grid, so what we're going to have to end up doing is give 2 types of questions. It's basically like 2 questionnaires. One type of question corresponds to the left and right dimension on this grid. So from left to right, all the way to the left, we have lawful characters. In the middle, we have neutral characters, and on the right, we have chaotic. So the left-right dimension is lawful, neutral, chaotic. And the vertical up and down dimension is measuring a different property. It is measuring whether or not you are good, neutral, or evil. So we're going to have 2 sets of questions for each of those 2 dimensions. We're basically going to decide how many times you answered let's say we're just talking about the left and right direction. How many times did you answer that you would make the chaotic choice? Or how many times did you answer saying that you would make the lawful choice? If you mostly answer lawful, we'll say that you're lawful. If you mostly answer chaotic, we'll say that you're chaotic. And if you are some balance, then we'll say that you're neutral. Same for the vertical. So we'll have this grid, and we need two sets of questions for these two different dimensions. Depending on the two scores you get for vertical or horizontal will decide which of the 9 types you are. So here's an example. If you don't understand the character alignments, you can think of this in terms of any show. You could tweak this and make it more like a, sticking with these 9 character types. Instead of saying, what is your alignment, you could change the language of the test to say, which Star Wars character are you, or which, whatever your favorite show is, or book or whatever, which blank character are you? And then you could have 9 different characters that the person could end up being. So I don't know how well you know these shows. We've got The Office and what is that one? I don't watch shows. Is that Veep or Parks and Rec? So I guess the way these two dimensions, what you can think of them as, is when you're talking about strategizing. As a side note, they often talk about your means, your ways, and your ends. The ends are what you want to see happen. So if you are trying to bring destruction to somebody, then that's your ultimate goal. That, like, whatever you choose to do, you're trying to be a menace. You're trying to sow chaos. Or maybe I shouldn't say it that way, but you're trying to damage somebody. Then you have evil ends. You have evil desires. You want outcomes that will hurt other people. Or you're just kind of selfish and you want to, benefit yourself to the detriment of other people. Those are your ends. What are you after? What do you want? What are you willing to do to get it? Or in what ways how are you do you have any rules about the way in which you achieve your ends? Do you have any principles, like even though you want something, are there any rules that kind of govern your behavior that will prevent you from taking the straight route to what you want? Maybe you have to find a way to get what you want that allows you to not violate your own personal code. So that's kind of like your ways, how you go about it. Means is more like what resources do you have at your disposal, what connections do you have, what can you bring to bear. So this isn't really about means. It doesn't really matter what the character's means are, if they're rich or poor, if they're powerful or not, if they have powers. None of that really matters. The question is what are their end goals, and are there any rules that govern their behavior? This one I wanted to talk about, this lawful evil, just in case you're still a little confused. I have like a little kind of example. Sometimes you'll see memes with like malicious compliance, like somebody, I read one, I forget the setup of the story, but somebody had to pay in cash or something, and he knew that the business owner was valued his time during the lunch hour rush, or wanted to get, serve each customer, get on to the next customer. Every customer he serves is more money, so he wants to move fast. So this person, got a fine for something, and so insisted on paying in tiny coins so that they had to be counted, and and did this daily just to slow things up. So they comply, but they do so in a way that um, sort of screws up the person who they're complying with. So here's a little drawing, draw a sheep. They follow the rules exactly, but they know the way they're doing it that they're trolling the person who wrote the exercise, because they know very well that the outcome is not going to be what the person intended, but they're complying. So that's kind of an example of lawful evil. You're kind of screwing with somebody, but you're following all the rules. Kind of like a defense where you technically don't lie. Let's say you knock something over and you break it, and somebody says, or let's say you threw something, like a potted plant, and it breaks. Somebody says, "Did you knock over the potted plant?" And you say no. So you're technically telling the truth, but you're deceiving. Kind of like that. All right, so what we're going to do is I'm going to make 5 questions, and for each category. So for the category of what do you want to get, is it good or bad, there's going to be 5 questions where people answer, and if they answer yes, then I guess it's they want to do good, and if they answer no to the question, one of those 5 questions, then they want to do bad things. So we'll just ask 5 questions. Do you want to do good? Do you want to do bad? They'll say yes or no. Then there'll be another 5 questions that basically ask people, will they follow the rules? No, like if it benefits them, whatever the case, will they stick to the rules or do it in the legal way, or are they happy to violate the rules in order to achieve what they want? So we'll have 5 questions for each category, and then if the person says, let's say we're talking about the rule breaking one, the ways, if people answer yes to these questions so many times, they'll be lawful. If they I guess I'm counting how many times they say no. So if they say no to chaotic questions 4 or 5 times, then they're lawful. If they say no hardly ever, then they're chaotic. And if it's a balance, then they're neutral. So that's how it's going to work. We're going to ask questions. We're going to record people's responses. There'll be 2 sets of 5. And then for each set of 5 questions, we'll basically count how many no's there are and determine your alignment for that dimension based on how many times you said no during the first set or the second set of 5 questions. I hope that makes some sense. So I kind of show the code, kind of like what we're going to end up doing. I'll come back to that in a second. Here's a visual representation of what's going to happen once we're done. So once the user goes through and they answer the 10 questions, then you have 2 sets of 5 questions, so 10 questions. And for each set, you're going to do these things. So you're going to do both of these twice, one for each set of questions. So let's say we're talking about the questions that ask about whether or not you do things lawfully or you do things chaotically. And let's make it so that we're going to call them the chaotic questions. And the way this is going to work is that if you answer yes to the chaotic questions, you will be lawful. And if you I see a slight mistake in here already. If you answer no to the chaotic questions, then you're chaotic. And if you're mixed, then we'll say you're neutral. So once you've finished answering your questions, then you're going to press the button and you're going to be done with the quiz. When you're done with the quiz, this is what the program needs to do. So first it's going to run a little algorithm, which is here on the left. And at the top, this is called a flow chart. And you just sort of follow the arrows. The sort of pill-shaped things at the top and bottom are the are where you start and where you terminate this little subroutine. The square boxes are steps in the process, the things that you do. And then the diamonds are decision points. So that's where you can go down one branch or the other after the decision point based on whether or not something is true or not. So if you look at the left, this little subroutine, all it does is once you're done answering questions, it's going to go through your questions or your responses, and it's going to basically just count how many times you said no. So basically we're going to check to see if your response was no, and just keep track of that. So what's going to happen? So there's 5 questions. So when we run the program, it's first going to initialize what we call the iterator, which is going to cycle through every element in the list of questions, or I should say the list of responses. And so it's going to start with the first element, and then it's going to say, does this element, is the response no? If it is no, even though it says yes, if it's a match, if it is no, then we increase the count by 1 and pass through. If it is not a no, then you just pass through without increasing your number by 1. So you count it if it's a no, otherwise you don't. And then you check to see if you're finished cycling through the list of responses. If you are finished, you're done counting. But if you're not finished, then you set the iterator to the next element and you come back again. Is that response a no? If so, count it. Otherwise, just go to the next one. And once you've cycled through 5 times in what we call a loop, once you've completed all that, this is a for each loop, you pass through to the end. And that means you've finished counting how many no responses there were to the 5 chaotic questions. So that's how the program works. It just cycles through the responses. If it's a no, add 1 to the number. If it's not a no, just keep going. And at the end, this number that we call chaotic tally should equal how many times you answered no. At that point, we run the next subroutine. So the first subroutine counts the chaotic tally, how many no's to the chaotic questions. And the second little subroutine basically tells you what word goes with that number of no responses, which is, I kind of put it here. If there's 5 no's or 4 no's, you're lawful. If there's 3 no's or 2 no's, you are neutral. And if there are 1 or fewer no's, then you're chaotic. Okay, so there's 5 questions, but this is what you can have, I guess. 6. Does that make sense? 1, 2. Oh well, whatever. No. Okay, yeah, that makes sense. Okay, so in this second algorithm, it basically just we figure out what the 1/3. We're going to take the number of questions and divide it by 3. So if there's 5 questions, our number becomes 5 divided by 3. So I'm just setting that number. So that means the reason I'm doing it this way is because what if you had more than 5 questions? Let's say you had 8 questions. Well, then 1/3 would be 8 divided by 3. If you have 100 questions, then you'd have 100 divided by 3. It doesn't matter how many, so you can have any number of questions that you want. I'm going with 5 questions each, but you could have a different number. So I'm calling this variable that I call 1/3. I'm just making that my total number of questions, which is 5 divided by 3. Here's my mistake on this slide. It should be 2 times 1/3 or 2/3. Okay, this one's okay. This one should be 1/3, but this one should be twice that. And the idea is that if I take 5 and I take 1/3 of it, that should put me between 1 and 2. And if I double it, it should put me between 3 and 4. So if I'm over, so the way this, so here's 2/3, it's between 3 and 4. You know, 2/3 of 5, that'd be 2 times 5, 10 divided by 3. So that should be 3.33 repeating. So 2/3 of 5 would be right in here. And 1/3 of 5 would be, I don't even know, 1.7-ish. So it'd be in here. So what this is saying is, if the total count, if the tally of chaotic no responses, is greater than 2/3 of the total number of questions, then we're lawful. So if we're above this mark, we're lawful. And then we end. So if we're above 2/3, we're lawful and we end. And you skip all this stuff down here. So if you pass this, you write lawful and you're done. You skip all the rest. If you're not above the 2/3 mark, only then will it ask, are you above the 1/3 mark? So if you're already not above this, you're below the 2/3, then being above the 1/3 means you're either a 2 or a 3. So if you came no here with 2/3, what it should be, it'll say, is the tally above 1/3? If that's yes, then you're in the neutral territory, and then you end. If you're not above 2/3 of the questions, and you're not above 1/3 of the questions, that means you're in the lowest amount. You're either a 0 or a 1, in which case we're going to append the word chaotic to our alignment. So we're going to call you chaotic. And that's how you get an alignment based on how many times you answered no to a chaotic question or a lawful question. One of those 5 questions. And that's pretty much exactly what you can kind of see in these code examples that I wrote. And this is what we're going to do in just a minute. We're going to say set the chaotic tally to 0, set the good tally to 0. So this is for the first set of 5 questions. This is for the second set of 5 questions. And then we're going to use a for each loop. We're going to cycle through every question in the chaotic list. And if the response is no for that question, we're going to count it. If it's not no, we're not going to count it. This only runs if the response is no. And so we're going to go through all 5 chaotic questions and tally whenever it's a no. And then we're going to do the same thing for the good questions. All 5 good questions, if it's a no, we tally that. And at the end, these are no longer 0 once these loops cycle through. They are equal to however many no's the answers were. And then the next one, let's look at the gray box. That's the chaotic stuff. That's basically this thing on the right. We're going to set the alignment to an empty text string. And we're going to say if your tally is greater than, in this case, greater than 3, I should have said 2/3 of 5, then we're lawful. If it's not, then check to see if it's greater than 1/3. And if it is, then you're neutral. Or else, in any other case, you're chaotic. So if you're not above this, you're lawful. I'm sorry, if you are above this, you're lawful. Otherwise, if you're above this, you're neutral. Otherwise, in any case, you're chaotic. That's what the gray does. So it clears this alignment, and then depending on your tally, it puts in lawful, neutral, or chaotic into the alignment. That's in the gray box. And now we do these same two algorithms for not just the chaotic questions, but now also for the, the good versus evil questions. So again, just go through all the questions and count how many no's. That is here, that's already written. For each question of the good questions, if the response is no, tally that, otherwise don't. And then this is what happens here. This in the black underneath the gray is pretty much the same as the gray, except the neutral thing is a little different, and I put that in its own box. So otherwise it's pretty much the same thing. If you're above the 3, it's, in this case, evil. If it's otherwise, if it's above the 1, it's neutral, and if it's below both those, it's good. So the only difference is if you have neutral, I don't want to put, so like let's say you're lawful in the first chaotic questions, and then in the good questions you're evil. You could be lawful evil, we can put those together. You could be neutral evil, you could be chaotic evil, that's fine. You could be lawful good, neutral good, chaotic good, that's fine. You could be lawful neutral, chaotic neutral, but neutral we don't put that. If the second word is neutral, then we're going to check to see if the first word is already neutral, because we don't want to put neutral. So if they're both neutral, so if the second word should be neutral, then check to see if the first word was neutral. If they're both neutral, then we just replace the whole thing with true neutral. Otherwise, if the first word was not neutral, it was lawful or chaotic, then we just stick the word neutral on the end. So it's lawful neutral, chaotic neutral. But we don't want neutral. We'd call that true neutral. So it's a little different. So we're going to build that in just 1 second. I'll probably pause the video and make a part 2. But one thing I will point out is the difference between some of these symbols. The double equals checks to see if something is equal to another thing. The single equals sets it equal. The plus equals keeps it what it is, but tacks the word onto the end of it. And then the blue stuff I put inside, I made that blue because it's in ifs. So those are conditionals. Those are checking to see if something matches something. Outside of those, it's green and yellow. That's actually changing the data. The blue stuff doesn't change the data, it just checks the data. Anyway, so that's the program. We're going to write these two algorithms twice. One for the chaotic question and one for the good question. And I'm going to show you how to do that, I guess, in our next video when we put the code in the project.